Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my quarterback rankings for 2025. I'm going to rank every single player that's a starting quarterback in the NFL this season because I know some of you play in Superflex, and the position gets very competitive in that format. So let's get it going. At the top, I think it's pretty obvious. I think there's really a tier of 4 players that could vie for QB1, and it's really just a matter of, do they have that rushing value that offers the cheat code? At number 1, I do have Lamar Jackson. Number 2 is Josh Allen, followed by Jayden Daniels at 3 and Jalen Hurts at 4. And maybe I don't trust Daniels and Hurts as much as Lamar and Josh Allen. There's a reason why they've won MVPs. But really, if everything goes right and everyone stays healthy in their offenses, then they can all finish the season as the QB1. Last year, it was Lamar Jackson. He averaged 25.2 points per game. He played all 17 games, stayed fully healthy, and it's really the rushing stats that really pad all the numbers. He averaged 54 rushing yards per game and scored a total of 45 total touchdowns. But interestingly, only 4 of them came on the ground. He was elite in the passing department, and he had the most touchdowns of any quarterback in the NFL. So I'm not going to expect those numbers to diminish for Lamar, even though he's dealt with some injuries in the past. To project him getting hurt is not the way I want to be approaching this video. I don't know what's going to happen. Injuries are random. Let's just hope and pray that every single player stays healthy this season. So I'm going to stick with Lamar. He was the overwhelming QB1, and he did average 1.6 points per game more than the next best player, Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills, who averaged 23.6. His rushing stats did diminish a little bit last year. He still averaged 34 rushing yards per game, and that's still on the much higher end of the spectrum in the NFL. So you're still getting a lot of value in terms of rushing yards, but really it's the rushing touchdowns that pad the numbers for Josh Allen. He had 13 rushing touchdowns last season, and that was second to only Jalen Hurts, who had 14. So you know for a fact you're getting a stud with Josh Allen. He's the best player arguably in the entire league. And if you wanted to rank him at number 1, I would not have a problem. But last year he finished as number 2. I'm going to keep him at number 2. And at number 3, I do have Jayden Daniels, who was QB3 as well in points per game last season. But he only played in 15 full healthy games last season. He was dealing with a chest injury that forced him off the field for 2 games. And then there was a 4-week period after the chest injury when I wouldn't say he was 100%. I believe he was recovering from that injury. He was not running the ball anywhere near as much. His rushing stats fell from 64 yards per game when healthy down to just 28 in the 4 weeks when he was recovering from the chest injury. So in those 4 games, he was not a top 20 quarterback. He only averaged 15.5 points per game. That ranked as QB 21. But if we remove those 4 weeks and look at the 11 games when he was fully healthy, he was actually better than Lamar on a points per game basis. He averaged 25.3 points per game, and that's what I would expect. He's going to be on par with Lamar and Josh Allen. So if you want to draft him in the same round, go ahead. If you want to draft him above them, maybe that's a bit bold, but it's not insane to do. And to get a full round discount on Jayden Daniels in round 4 as opposed to Lamar and Josh Allen in round 3 is kind of nice. But they're on opposite sides of the board. If you're drafting early in the 3rd round, I would just take your favorite quarterback. Overall, there's no way Daniels comes back around in the late 4th round. And these days, Jalen Hurts is also going as a 4th round pick, and I think that's perfectly an appropriate price. Last year, he was only quarterback 6 in points per game. However, he did deal with a lot of injuries to his receiving core. A.J. Brown missed 4 games last year. Devontae Smith missed 3 games, and there were several games where at least one of them was off the field. So if we remove those stats, if we look at the 9 full games when Jalen Hurts was active and had both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith healthy on the field, his stats jump up from 21 points per game up to 25.2 points per game. And that is tied with Lamar Jackson exactly for QB1. So just like Jayden Daniels, there's an argument to be made that assuming everyone in Philadelphia stays healthy, Jalen Hurts could be the quarterback 1 in fantasy. Last year, he scored 14 rushing touchdowns, and those are very valuable. You get 6 points for a rushing touchdown. You only get 4 for a passing touchdown. And the league did not ban the tush push, so that is probably going to repeat. I don't think there's a world where Jalen Hurts does not score at least double-digit rushing touchdowns once again. But maybe Saquon doesn't get tackled at the 1 as many times. Maybe there are a few less opportunities for them to punch it in on 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1. So I definitely trust these 4 quarterbacks, but because of some injuries last year, I do have Daniels and Jalen Hurts behind Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. But I think they're really all kind of the same MVP cheat codes that are going to be staples in your lineup. If you draft one of these guys, while you are paying a premium, you don't need a backup. That's a luxury, an extra roster spot to maybe stream a defense or pick up a handcuff running back that could pop. Having that roster flexibility with one of these 4 players is valuable. So I would be coveting them. I think they are one of the easiest paths to make the playoffs. And if you're new to fantasy, if you're not as confident in your ability to like always make the right decision on who to start or sit every week, then maybe just play it safe and grab one of these guys in the 3rd or 4th round. They are definitely not going to hurt you by taking them that high. So I definitely trust them. I think they're in the top tier for sure. If you want to consider Daniels and Hurts in a tier below of Lamar and Allen, I guess you could make that argument, but personally I view them all kind of the same. I don't see that much of a difference. So those are the top 4, pretty much locked in. That's kind of guaranteed. If you did not know that, you're probably living under a rock. But at 5 and 6, I don't think you're losing that much value. However, the rushing upside is definitely not the same with these 2 players. At 5 and 6, this is my Steely Dan tier, Joe Burrow and Baker Mayfield. Why Steely Dan? I'm really hoping that they do it again. Last year, Burrow did rank as quarterback 4 in scoring. He averaged 21.9 points per game. However, there were 5 weeks when T. Higgins was off the field, and if you remove those 5 games, if you look at the 12 weeks when T. Higgins was fully healthy, then Joe Burrow was on pace with Daniels as the quarterback 3. He averaged 22.7 points per game when everyone was healthy. But Burrow does not get it done in the rushing department. He only averaged 11 rushing yards per game last season. He gets it done in the passing game, and he averaged 290 passing yards per game in 17 games played last year. So he's a stud. He's a potential MVP winner this year, and I wouldn't be shocked if his stats are even better than last season. He threw for 43 touchdowns and had 2 rushing scores as well. So there are some weeks when he does add a little bit on the ground, but in general, it's just the passing stats that really bolster his floor, and I don't think they're going anywhere. His defense is still trash. He has Jamar Chase, he has T. Higgins. As long as they're healthy, with Chase Brown adding numbers in the passing game as well, Burrow is a lock in your lineup. So at QB5, I don't think you can go wrong. If he won the MVP this year, I would not be shocked at all, and he's going to be a stud in fantasy again. Definitely going to average over 20 points in 2025. But Baker Mayfield was right in line with him last year. Baker was also better than Jalen Hurts. He averaged 21.4 points per game. And there was also some injuries to his wide receiver core as well. We all know that Godwin went down with a brutal ankle injury, but even Mike Evans missed some time as well. So if we cherry pick, if we look at the 7-game sample size when the receivers were fully healthy in Tampa, Baker was also a top 3 quarterback, averaged 22.9 points per game, and that was right in line with Jayden Daniels and the best sample size for Joe Burrow as well. So you could be getting a top 3 quarterback with Baker, and in my opinion, the Tampa Bay Bucs offense is not going to be much worse. The elite receiving core is still there. At some point, Godwin will return, and then they also drafted Emeka Egbuka with the 19th overall pick. He's going to be a really good player at the receiver spot. So Mike Evans is still on the team. He's still healthy. Baker's not falling off, and Baker does offer twice as many rushing yards per game as Joe Burrow. He averaged 22 rushing yards per game last season, and he also scored 3 rushing touchdowns. When that happens, it's a nice boost, but in general, you're not expecting it. So Baker should probably be similar, but I do trust Joe Burrow a little bit more. There's a reason why Baker goes like 3 rounds later than Burrow, but I don't think there's that much of a difference between these two players. They were both averaging over 21 fantasy points per game last season, and hopefully they can do it again. However, once we drop to quarterback 7, I think we are entering a massively different category at the position. Here is a chart of last year's quarterback scoring, every player ranked from most points per game down to the fewest. Those are the dark blue stats here, and there is a considerable drop-off between Jalen Hurts, QB6, and Jared Goff, who was QB7. More than 2 points per game does differentiate them, and then starting with quarterback 9 down the board, it very obviously trickles down at a consistent rate. So there is a big teardrop, and if you draft quarterback 7 or later as your number 1 starter, I think you should be drafting a backup. I think you should have another player on your bench that you can pivot to, because the quarterback position is one of the most matchup dependent positions you can find. So playing the waiver wire is not the worst idea. Starting the quarterback with the far better matchup is sometimes the best strategy you can find, and that's what makes quarterback a very streamable position. You can kind of play the field if you're in a smaller league and the position is not as competitive off the waiver wire. But if you're in a super flex format, if you're in a deeper format, you definitely want to be drafting as many as like 25 quarterbacks heading into the season. So these guys are definitely highly coveted, but they're all kind of in a flat tier. Quarterbacks 7 through 15, in my opinion, are all very similar to each other. So this next tier is 4 players deep. Quarterbacks 7 through 10, I have Bo Nix, Brock Purdy, Patrick Mahomes, and then call me a homer, but I do have Justin Herbert as the quarterback 10. These are the safe, low-end QB1s, and they're going to be reliable starters every single week. You're going to know for a fact you're getting at least 16 to 20 points no matter what. And in general, it's very important that you avoid a bust at the position. If you get 12 or fewer fantasy points at quarterback, you are generally screwed. It's very hard to come back from that, and they can really burn you, definitely lead to an L in that matchup. So although they might not finish this high every single week, I do trust them to be the most consistent overall. And the reason I have Bo Nix at number 7 is because last year he was a top 10 quarterback. In his rookie season, he averaged 18.6 points per game, and he did offer some legitimate rushing value as well. He averaged 25 rushing yards per game. He also had 5 rushing touchdowns overall. Technically 4, but he also caught a receiving touchdown, and that's worth 6 points. It counts in my book as a rushing touchdown. So Bo Nix was very phenomenal in his rookie season, and a big reason why I trust him to repeat those numbers is because Sean Payton is his head coach. Sean Payton knows exactly what he's doing, one of the best offensive minds in the NFL, and he's definitely going to keep Bo Nix viable in fantasy. But if we look at last year for Bo Nix, in general, the rookies always play better in the second half of the year, and that was definitely the case with Bo Nix. In the final 8 games, he averaged 20.8 points per game. So he was barely behind Jalen Hurts. He was putting up over 2 fantasy points more than he was overall on the season. So I trust that these are the stats to repeat. He was a lot more reliable in the passing game. His yardage was an average of 253 yards per game, and that is definitely on the higher end of the spectrum. It's pretty rare that quarterbacks average over 250 yards on a per game basis. Last year, it was definitely harder to come by in general. So with the addition of Evan Ingram, with the addition of RJ Harvey and J.K. Dobbins, along with Pat Bryant, I think this offense is going to be even better than last season, and Bo Nix is going to be the straw that stirs the drink. I really trust Bo Nix. I think he will take a leap forward in year 2. So I think he's a very reliable top 10 quarterback. The only quarterbacks that I have not ranked that were better than him last year would be Jared Goff, who was quarterback 7, and technically Justin Fields, but Fields only played in 6 games, much smaller sample size, but he was barely better than Bo Nix. So I trust Bo Nix. I think he's a very reliable option. And when you cherry pick his back half of the season, he did rank as quarterback 7 in points per game. At number 8, I do have Brock Purdy, who last year was also better than Mahomes. Last year, Brock Purdy was quarterback 11, averaging 17.8 points per game. However, the situation in San Francisco was not ideal. There were a lot of injuries. Ayuk was never healthy. McCaffrey was never healthy. Debo had pneumonia. And in general, it was just a snake-bitten season for the Niners. But Purdy was pretty productive. He had 5 rushing touchdowns, 25 touchdowns total. And he also offered 22 rushing yards per game. So that is an underrated aspect of his game. He's actually pretty useful on the ground, and we know that the upside in this Kyle Shanahan passing game is always high. If we look at the year prior, he averaged 18.5 points per game, and in general, you're getting a very reliable option. You're kind of locked in to a top 10 quarterback every week with Brock Purdy. So I trust the floor. I think this year with a healthy McCaffrey and at some point Ayuk returning to the field with Pearsall fully healthy, I think this offense is going to be just as good as we've seen in the past. Their defense is not as good, so they might be required to score more points. I think Purdy's going to be a very safe play. I think the floor is locked in to about 18 points per game. So that's kind of all you can ask for at this point in the rankings, and if he does finish in the top 7, I would not be surprised. There's definitely some upside from Brock Purdy. They can drop 30, 40 points on the scoreboard in San Francisco any given week, and that means Purdy will benefit. If he gives you like 25, 30 points, it's not a surprise. He has that elite upside available to him. So I absolutely trust Brock Purdy. And last year, he was better than Patrick Mahomes, just barely. Mahomes is quarterback 12, averaging 17.7 points per game. And Mahomes has kind of been falling off a little bit the last 2 seasons. He's not quite the same player we remember when he was winning MVPs. So I'm not expecting a 5,000-yard passing season from Mahomes really ever again. This team wins mainly on defense. And even though Rashee Rice is probably going to start the season healthy and available, at some point I do think he will get suspended. Kelsey is 36 years old, and Hollywood Brown is already injured. So this wide receiver core is not as reliable as some might suggest, but it wouldn't shock me at all if Mahomes was going to bounce back and finish in that top 7. But I'd rather have Baker, I'd rather have Bo Nix, and personally, at a discount, I'd rather have Brock Purdy. Call me a Chiefs hater, but that's just my personal preference. Mahomes is my QB9. However, last year, there was some games when you can cherry pick where he was quarterback 7. Just like Bo Nix, if we look at the back half of Mahomes' season, his final 8 games, he did average 19.7 points per game, and that's when he was starting to figure things out with his revamped wide receiver core. Xavier Worthy was a lot more trustworthy in those matchups. So maybe you are wanting to rely on those numbers a bit more. Maybe you'd rather go Mahomes over Brock Purdy, but the rushing stats have been diminishing a little bit for Mahomes. Last year, he only averaged 20 rushing yards per game and only scored 2 rushing touchdowns. He only had 28 touchdowns total on the season, and for some reason his numbers have been trickling down. He is not as good as he used to be, and sometimes he also has like the interception bug. For some reason, there are some high pick numbers for Mahomes on occasion. So I personally just don't want that many Chiefs on my team. I want to win without them. If you think I'm wrong, go ahead. But personally, I'm going to be avoiding Mahomes a little bit. I'd rather have Bo Nix, who does get drafted much later. And then a player I think is a steal in the overall ADP would be Justin Herbert. He goes off the board as quarterback 17 off the board, but I rank him at number 10. I think from a safety net standpoint, a reliable floor. Herbert is one of the safest quarterbacks you can find, but last year he was not this good. Last year he ranked as quarterback 16 in points per game, but that was behind players like Jameis Winston and Justin Fields, much smaller sample sizes. Technically, he was more like quarterback 14 in scoring. But Herbert was not fully healthy last year. He was injured in the preseason, did not practice very much in August, and did not get fully healthy until about week 7. He had 4 banged up games, then a bye in week 5. And I think if you're giving him the benefit of the doubt, you can remove week 6 and 7 as well from the equation when he was getting healthy. So if we only look at weeks 8 through 18, Justin Herbert's final 11 games, Herbert was actually very reliable. He averaged 19 points per game, and that would have ranked above Bo Nix, above Purdy and Mahomes last year. It would have ranked his quarterback 7 in points per game scoring. So I can absolutely make an argument that Herbert should be ranked in the top 10. That's why I'm doing it. And maybe I'm just a homer. Maybe it's just my Chargers bias. But with the addition of Keenan Allen, Trey Harris, and a boost in the run game with Omarion Hampton and technically Najee Harris, those are all upgrades from the players we were counting on last year. So I think the passing game is going to be way better for Herbert. He doesn't throw many interceptions. He's really reliable from a floor standpoint. And his rushing yards are underrated. Last year he averaged 25 rushing yards per game in those 11 weeks when he was fully healthy. He also scored 2 rushing touchdowns in that sample size as well. So 19 points per game is, I think, more so the safe floor to expect from Herbert. And that's why I think he's one of the most valuable picks on the board. Going as quarterback 17 is way too low. But if you wanted to rank him closer to quarterback 13, 14, 12, I think that's fine. But I think lower than 14, I think is egregiously too low. I think you're underestimating Herbert's upside. He's one of the best passers in the NFL. So I trust Justin Herbert, especially in the regular season. He's not as great in the playoffs, but that doesn't count in fantasy. So those are my top 10 quarterbacks. I think a very reliable tier here. Very safe low-end quarterback ones. And once again, I want to mention quarterbacks 7 through 15 are extremely matchup dependent. You want a backup, and you can bench them in bad spots and put in a backup that you think has a much better opportunity and ceiling in a given matchup. So get them at a good value. But these next quarterbacks, I think, are all extremely valuable because of their rushing upside. They have potentially top 5 upside, but they're not as proven and are not as safe picks. In my opinion, on a week-to-week basis, you might get a very volatile player. And when you're chasing points, expecting last week's big game to repeat, sometimes you can get burned. They might not do it again the week after. You might get 25 points on your bench, and then the next week you're convinced, oh, I got to start them, and then you get burned with like 13 points and an L. So good luck with these guys, but I think they are very valuable. I think the last 4 quarterbacks I mentioned, plus these 4, I think are really valuable. I would love to have 2 of them. I'd feel really confident in my quarterback production this season. But at 11, I got Drake Maye, followed by Caleb Williams at 12, then Justin Fields at 13, and then Kyler Murray at 14. Let's start with Drake Maye, who last year averaged 16 points per game, but I think is going to take a big leap in year 2. He gets Josh McDaniel as his new offensive coordinator. McDaniels returns to New England, and last time we saw him there, he made Mac Jones a Pro Bowler. So I do think that's really going to benefit Drake Maye's development. And from a rushing standpoint, Drake Maye is one of the most valuable rushing quarterbacks you can find. Last year, he averaged 36 rushing yards per game, and that was more than both Josh Allen and Kyler Murray, among many others. So he's really underrated in that department, and the touchdowns were not that high in that system last year. There were no weapons. The run game is much more improved. And with the addition of Stephon Diggs, I definitely trust that Josh McDaniels will bolster Drake Maye as a weekly start in fantasy. I think the lowest I could rank Drake Maye is quarterback 13, but at quarterback 11, I think that I might be ranking him too low. I think you could legitimately get a top 6 season out of Drake Maye, given his rushing production. So last year he did suffer a concussion, technically 2, and there is a chance that he does come off the field. He's a bit reckless at times, but I really trust that the upside in fantasy is going to be there. I think Drake Maye is a very valuable, reliable quarterback and has that ceiling available to him. If he averages 19 plus points per game this season, I would not be surprised at all. So love Drake Maye, one of my most coveted quarterbacks this season. And if I end up with Drake Maye and Justin Herbert, I think I have a really safe combo. Herbert gives you an elite floor every week, and Drake Maye also pairs up with that elite ceiling. So these are the two quarterbacks I think I'm targeting the most. I think the most valuable options in terms of ADP price tags. And I'm really convinced that Drake Maye could be a league winner this season. At 12, I think it's a bit more of a gamble, but I want to trust Ben Johnson. Caleb Williams was terrible last season, but he was never in a position to succeed given their head coaching situation. Eberflus got fired, they got rid of Shane Waldron, and then at the end of the season, the backup offensive coordinator was promoted to head coach. Like, nothing was really good for Caleb Williams, but there were some massive spike weeks for him. He did have like 28, 30 points in several weeks, but then he also had like 10 points or less in many weeks as well. So there is going to be some growing pains. I don't know if he's fully equipped to understand this system in week 1, but I think by the time we hit week 10, Caleb is going to be a very reliable option and a staple in your lineup. Another reason I really trust him is the fact that he offers a lot of rushing yards as well. Last year, he had just shy of 500 rushing yards, an average of 29 rushing yards per game. So that is a very safe floor addition. If you get 3 points on the ground, plus all of the extra touchdowns we're expecting thanks to Ben Johnson, I trust Caleb Williams a lot more than last season. With the addition of Colston Loveland and Luther Burden, I think Rome Odunze is going to take a leap, and I don't think DJ Moore is going to be much worse than he has been in the past. So I trust Caleb Williams. I don't know if every week he's going to be an elite option, but I think when he pops off, he's going to be one of the best quarterbacks in fantasy in those matchups. So I trust Ben Johnson. I trust the talent for Caleb Williams, and the rushing stats I think really keep the floor high. I think he's a valuable asset to have, and maybe in the beginning of the season I won't trust him as much, but as we get later in the year, I think he will crack the top 10 in a pretty consistent rate. So I like Caleb Williams a lot. At QB 12, I want to be drafting him quite often. At 13, I have Justin Fields, who was a top 10 quarterback in points per game last year, but he only played 6 games with the Steelers. And I trust the Steelers to kind of like keep him in check. I really have no idea what to expect in terms of the recklessness in the Jets offense. I have no idea what's going to happen. And other than Garrett Wilson, there's really no reliable options for him to throw the ball to. Like, what are we getting from the rookie Mason Taylor? Josh Reynolds is the wide receiver 2, and this team is definitely going to run the ball like crazy with Breece Hall and Braylon Allen. Even Isaiah Davis probably going to get some touches in the run game. So it's really just the rushing stats that make you enticed with Justin Fields. Last year, Fields was averaging 39 rushing yards per game. So very reliable in that department. He also scored 5 rushing touchdowns in his 6 starts, but then he also only threw for 5 passing touchdowns in those 6 starts as well. So that is the main concern. The passing stats are going to be terrible, and it wouldn't shock me if he threw for less than 3,000 passing yards this season. It's not a very safe bet in general for Justin Fields. So he can definitely win you your week, but he can also crater it and cost you a win. And he's also kind of reckless. He does get injured quite often. I don't expect him to play a full season. So because of that injury risk on top of it, I think at the beginning of the year, he's probably going to be a valuable top 10 quarterback. But by the end of the season, there's going to be a lot of randomness and probably some missed time. I don't think Fields will be in your lineup every week consistently. So that's why I'm bumping him down a few spots. On Underdog, he goes as quarterback 11. And while I love the upside, I don't know if it's going to be reliable to hit every week. I think he's a better pick in best ball than redraft, but it's undeniable he does have like 30-point upside any given game, and that's a valuable asset to have. So I do want to draft him. I think as a backup, he's one of the best options you can find, but the volatility will be a bit difficult to predict, and without the rushing stats and rushing touchdowns, you may not crack 15 points from Justin Fields. So quarterback 13, I think he's more of a backup. And while he's valuable, I don't want to trust him as the starter in my lineup week in, week out. Same applies with Kyler Murray. I know some people really trust Kyler Murray. He's going off the board as quarterback 8 on Underdog, but personally, I think that's way too high, and I don't see him paying off top 10 value. Last year, he was quarterback 13 in points per game on average, only 17.4. And if you look at the one game when Trey McBride was injured, he only put up 10 points in that matchup. He was terrible without McBride, his top target. And when you really think about this offense, it's pretty thin. Like, if James Conner went down, what is this team? I don't trust them at all in general. So they didn't add any pieces this offseason, whether it's in free agency or the draft. They added no one, and you're relying on a guy like Zay Jones to be healthy and bolster the target share and offer a reliable number 2 option behind Marvin Harrison at wide receiver, because I don't trust Michael Wilson. Wilson's a really disappointing player. And then Greg Dortch doesn't move the needle at all. It's all Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison. Last year, Kyler Murray only threw for 21 touchdowns and did add 5 rushing touchdowns as well. So it's really a question of, will he stay healthy? He averaged 34 rushing yards per game, but like I mentioned with Drake Maye had more, and Drake Maye is going 2 rounds cheaper. I'd much rather just draft Drake Maye at a big discount. I don't see a big difference between Kyler and Drake Maye. So personally, I'd rather bet on the younger player who has the potential to elevate his game and is getting better. Meanwhile, Kyler has been diminishing year over year, and as a smaller quarterback is definitely a little bit more injury prone. So I don't think he's going to be better. I think if anything, Kyler's going to be worse than last season, and that's why I rank him at quarterback 14. Last year in points per game, he was on par with this ranking. So he's a player I'm avoiding. I think he's overpriced, and I think you can get more reliable players multiple rounds later. I think Kyler is a good player to let other players draft and avoid the downside. So Kyler's still valuable. Those rushing stats definitely pad the numbers, and I understand the upside that does come with Kyler. But if he's not giving you like 25 points, there's a lot of times when he gives you like 14, 15 points or less, and that doesn't move the needle very much. It's a decent floor, but not enough to guarantee a win in fantasy football. So Kyler is an avoid. I do not want to be drafting Kyler, but I do view him as a top 15 quarterback. That is valuable. As a backup, I think he's a really good option, but in general, I don't want him as my starter. In the next tier, quarterbacks 15 through 18, I think are all very draftable backups. I think these are some of the highly coveted options you can have that are going to bolster your floor, going to offer a very safe option every single week. But at 15, I have Jordan Love, followed by Dak Prescott at 16, then Jared Goff and Trevor Lawrence to round out the top 18. I really trust Jordan Love because last year he was still a top 15 quarterback when healthy. In his 13 full games, he averaged 16.9 points per game. That was right behind Kyler Murray for QB 14 in overall scoring. And that's why I think I might be ranking him a little bit too low. If we look to last year, he was never fully healthy. He had a groin injury in week 1 in that Brazil game. He also came off the field mid-season again. And Malik Willis did get a lot more snaps than we would have expected. But when Malik Willis was active, he was a top 10 quarterback. He averaged 19 points per game. Granted, Malik Willis does run the ball a lot more than Jordan Love, but I think the drafting of Matthew Golden is really going to bolster the floor for Jordan Love. I think he's a really reliable option because if he can get back to what he was putting up 2 years ago in the back half of the season, he does have top 10 upside. If we look at 2023, technically his rookie year, Jordan Love finished it really strong. In his final 9 games, he averaged 20.9 points per game. He was throwing the ball for 271 yards per game, had 20 passing touchdowns in those 9 games, and that's the type of production we are looking for in the touchdown department. So Jordan Love has elite upside. I trust his coach. I trust his receivers. However, at the moment, Jayden Reed is a bit banged up and Christian Watson is banged up as well. Last year, they really relied on the run game, but I do think they're going to be favoring the pass a bit more. Jordan Love should be good once again. So I think there's actually like league winning upside for Jordan Love. I think based on his ADP at quarterback 18, he is going well behind what I think he'll put up. And I could see a world where he does average top 10 numbers on a points per game basis. So I could argue he's just as valuable as Justin Herbert, Drake Maye, and Caleb Williams. But I think quarterback 10 is probably the highest I'd be willing to go. At QB 15, though, that is technically worse than what he was putting up last season in points per game when fully healthy. So I do trust Jordan Love a lot. It's just a question of, will he live up to expectation? There's only like small sample sizes where Jordan Love does access that elite potential. So I think he's a very underrated player. I do trust him quite a bit. If Matthew Golden is as good as advertised, then Love is really going to pay off in terms of fantasy points. So I think he's a really good player to target. He's being drafted as quarterback 18, and I think that's way too low. I honestly feel like I'm ranking him too low at 15. I kind of want to put him above Caleb Williams, behind Drake Maye at QB 12. So a player I'm really, really excited to have as my backup. Jordan Love is extremely valuable. At QB 16, though, I think this player is being drafted too high. It's Dak Prescott off the board as quarterback 12 in underdog ADP. And last year, Dak Prescott was not good at all. He did get hurt, but in his 7 full healthy games, he was averaging less than 15 fantasy points per game. 14.9 is not going to cut it. So what are you going to get from Dak coming off the hamstring injury? Without Mike McCarthy, I don't know if I trust Brian Schottenheimer. There's a chance that he's just as bad as last year, and that wasn't even a top 20 quarterback. So Dak could definitely bust. However, the reason why we're drafting him as quarterback 12 is the optimism that he comes back to what we saw 2 years ago when he was an MVP candidate and a stud in fantasy. 2 years ago, he averaged 19.9 points per game in that offense. But Mike McCarthy was there, and Brandon Cooks was really reliable in the touchdown department. So was Jake Ferguson. I don't think that's going to happen this season without Mike McCarthy. But George Pickens is there, a reliable number 2 wide receiver for Dak to throw the ball to. There is a chance that his touchdown numbers really get padded, and he's a safe option in fantasy. But I don't fully trust him. I think coming off the hammy, he's not going to offer any rushing value. And in general, I worry about his injury risk. He has suffered some season-ending injuries multiple times in the past. So Dak is not a player I'm coveting very often. If I'm not stacking him with Lamb or Pickens, in general, I want to avoid him. I think the value on Justin Herbert and Jordan Love going a full round later is way more coveted, in my opinion. So I am not dying to draft Dak Prescott. I'm also not dying to draft Jared Goff, my quarterback 17. And last year, Goff was quarterback 7 in overall points per game. 18.9 was his average. That was tied with Justin Fields. It was better than Bo Nix, Sam Darnold, Brock Purdy, and Patrick Mahomes. Also, some top 12 quarterbacks. So I might be underestimating Jared Goff, but last year's going to be hard to repeat. He had 37 passing touchdowns with Ben Johnson as his play caller. So I'm expecting a lot of that production to go to Caleb Williams and a lot of it to fall off for Jared Goff. And Goff is just not valuable in the run game. He offers nothing with his legs. If he averages -1 rushing yards this season, it wouldn't be that shocking. It's not going to be more than 5. So you get nothing on the ground. That's really a cheat code in fantasy, and expecting some diminished numbers is probably a safe bet without Ben Johnson. I think their schedule is also pretty brutal. They have some really tough road games, a lot fewer dome games, and when he's not playing indoors, his stats really fall off a cliff. They drop off from like 20 points per game down to like 14 points per game when he's playing outdoors or on the road. So I do not trust Goff very much this season. His price isn't terrible. He's going off as quarterback 15 on underdog. I have him as quarterback 17, so I still think that's too high, but there is a world where I'm wrong and he doesn't fall off at all. Maybe John Morton, the new OC in Detroit, is going to pay off at the same rate as Ben Johnson, but odds are that's just not going to be the case. First time offensive coordinator and play caller in Detroit. Not excited with John Morton calling the plays. So I'm worried about Goff with a lack of rushing value at all. I don't think he's worth it in the top 15, but he is a safe backup to have. Definitely top 20, but not top 15. At 18, I also think Trevor Lawrence is in this tier as well. And Lawrence has some underrated rushing value in that offense. He was quarterback 21 last year in his full games, averaging 15.5 points per game. So I am expecting him to be better this year with Liam Cohen as the head coach and play caller. The offense is definitely going to be much better. And Brian Thomas really came into his own with Mac Jones. I expect Brian Thomas to be a true stud alpha receiver this season. But Travis Hunter, I think, really adds to this value here. Trevor Lawrence needs that reliable number 2 target, and it looks like Travis Hunter is going to play a lot more on offense than defense this year. So I trust Trevor Lawrence. I think the floor is pretty reliable. And if we go back to 2022, back before he got injured when he made the playoffs, T-Law was actually a top 10 quarterback in fantasy. He averaged 18.7 points per game in his final 9 games of 2022. There was some high-end production. He had 17 total touchdowns in his final 9 games back in 2022. So I'm optimistic that those are the numbers that could repeat. There is a chance that Trevor Lawrence is a top 12 quarterback this season in fantasy. I wouldn't put it completely past him. While I probably wouldn't bet on it, I am at quarterback 18. I think it is possible, and he is underrated in the rushing category. In that 2022 season, in those games I'm kind of cherry picking, he had 21 rushing yards per game and 2 rushing touchdowns in 9 weeks. So there have been some good touchdown numbers for Lawrence in the past. While he has looked like kind of a bust recently, I don't think he's terrible, and I think at worst he's a top 20 quarterback this season. So up until this point, we've had some very safe backup quarterbacks along with some starters. However, these next players I think could crack your lineup consistently, and they might be waiver wire gems at some point this season. In this tier, I have the unproven young guys, Bryce Young, JJ McCarthy, and Michael Penix. And at this point, if you're in a shallow format, you might not want to draft them. You might just want to wait and see if they can put up good numbers. But last year, Bryce Young really paid off when he came back from his benching. In his 10 final games after Andy Dalton was the starter, Bryce Young actually averaged 18 fantasy points per game in his final 10 starts. That ranked his quarterback 11 in points per game. So he was actually very, very reliable in fantasy. He was pretty underrated in the rushing department. He averaged 22 rushing yards per game and also 5 rushing touchdowns in those 10 matchups. If we cherry pick even more after the bye, if we look at his last 7 games, he was quarterback 7, averaging 20.7 points per game. So there's actually the upside here that we saw from Bo Nix. I might be ranking Bryce Young way too low, even though I am ranking him above ADP. Bryce Young gets drafted at quarterback 22, and I have him ranked at quarterback 19. I wouldn't be that shocked if he was a weekly top 12 quarterback and is one of the most valuable options you can draft overall. Like if he finished better than Dak Prescott, Jared Goff, Kyler Murray, I would not be that surprised. If last year's back half of the season does repeat, then Bryce Young is capable of being a league winner. However, on the year, he was pretty terrible. He averaged only 13.9 points per game on the season, and that ranked his quarterback 31 overall. So I'm meeting somewhere in the middle. I think there's some high risk, high reward ratio with Bryce Young, but if it works out, you might be getting a steal and a potential top 12 player at the position. His rushing stats should be somewhat similar, and then the fact that Tedero McMillan is there in this offense this year is definitely going to boost the numbers in the passing touchdown category. So I do trust Bryce Young. I think as a backup, he's actually a reliable low-end option, but there's a chance his ceiling is top 12. Same goes with JJ McCarthy. Last year, Sam Darnold was a top 10 quarterback, and Kevin O'Connell is a QB whisperer. I think trusting KOC as the head coach and play caller is probably the wise decision. But JJ McCarthy is only 22 years old. It's his rookie season, and he was not relied upon very heavily in college. So I think there's going to be some growing pains, a steep learning curve for JJ McCarthy, and I don't think he's going to offer very much value in the rushing game. But there is a chance I'm dead wrong. There is a chance he does just slide right in with the same production as Sam Darnold. But in general, I don't rely on it. I don't trust it to repeat. And I think he's a little bit more likely to bust than pay off. So at quarterback 20, I think he is being drafted too high. His ADP is QB 16 on Underdog. And in general, if I'm not stacking him with Jefferson or TJ Hawkinson or Addison, I am not trying to draft JJ McCarthy that much. But I could be wrong. He's an unproven young player and he might be elite, but in general, I don't trust a rookie to put up top 10 numbers right out the gate. JJ McCarthy probably is not going to work out. But at quarterback 21, there's also a world where Michael Penix puts up elite numbers in the passing game. The only problem with Penix, though, is that he does not run the ball. And in 3 starts last year, Penix was not very valuable at all. Penix only averaged 14.2 points per game when he was the starter at the end of the season. Those 3 games were not that good for fantasy purposes. And the big reason why is because he only averaged 4 rushing yards per game. His touchdown production was not very high. They relied on Bijan a lot more in the red zone. And if that doesn't change this season, then Penix will be a massive bust in fantasy. However, I do think he could be way better than last year. I think the touchdown production in the passing game could skyrocket. Last year, Kirk Cousins had some big blow-up games, and it is possible that happens again with Michael Penix. I think Penix's talent is undeniable, but his rushing stats are never going to pay off, and that's why he's probably just more of a floor play in fantasy football. But there are going to be some great matchups for him where I think he can throw for well over 300 yards and 3+ touchdowns. I think there's going to be some big blow-up games, and then some other games where he just doesn't have to do very much or hits a bad matchup and does crater for less than 15 points and an automatic L. So I am kind of worried about Penix, but I think if you look at his tape, the talent is undeniable. He can really chuck it down the field, and he has a true rocket arm. I love Michael Penix from a talent standpoint, but in fantasy, I wish he ran the ball more. That's why I don't fully trust him. But at QB 21, I might be underestimating his true upside. The potential is definitely there. I probably wouldn't bet on it, though, as my starter week 1 because of a lack of rushing production. But next up, these are probably guys you're not going to be drafting, but are going to be valuable bye-week fill-ins, some good waiver wire pickups. If you're streaming the position, these guys are actually pretty valuable. But Geno Smith at QB 22, I think is a value being drafted at quarterback 25. I like him a lot. I trust Chip Kelly to get this offense rolling. However, he's going to rely heavily on the run game, and that might diminish some of the passing volume for Geno Smith. But he has some good passing weapons. Bowers is elite. Jacoby Myers is underrated. And then some of the young guys beyond that are actually pretty solid and offer some upside. But Genty also catches passes. It's not going to be just a strict run game in Las Vegas. I think because the defense is so terrible, there's also going to be some good game script and some shootout potential for Geno Smith. So I like him at QB 22. I think he's a good, valuable option in terms of ADP price tag, and I think he is being drafted a little too late. I like Geno Smith. Last year, he was a top 20 quarterback on pace with Trevor Lawrence in scoring. He averaged 15.6 points per game last year, and I think he'll be coming close to that this season, somewhere around quarterback 20, quarterback 22. So I do like Geno Smith. I draft him a lot, but definitely as my backup or quarterback 3. And then at quarterback 23, I do have Sam Darnold, who was a top 10 quarterback last season, probably an underrated option given his ADP is quarterback 28. So I do draft him quite a bit. He had 4,300 passing yards and 35 touchdowns last season. He's moving from Minnesota to Seattle. He's not going to put up those caliber numbers, but I don't think Clint Kubiak is going to be a terrible play caller either. So I think Darnold could live up to last year's production, but odds are it's not going to hit very often. I think he'll be fine, but probably not top 20, definitely not top 10, but perhaps in good matchups, he does crack the top 5 like he did last season several times. So Darnold is interesting, but maybe not my favorite quarterback to bet on, definitely just a backup. And then Cam Ward, we've never seen it with him. There is kind of equally high upside with Cam Ward. He threw for 4,300 yards and 39 touchdowns last year in college. And there's a chance that he's so elite down the field that he does put up really good numbers as well. Like I wouldn't be shocked if him and Michael Penix do offer some like very high upside in terms of fantasy quarterback play. So I kind of want to draft Cam Ward and see what happens, but in general, I'm going to pass and maybe pick him up off the waiver wire after a few weeks if he looks good. I do think Cam Ward with a terrible defense could have some really good garbage time stats as well. So I really trust the upside, but in general, the floor is not going to be that reliable. This is kind of a boom bust tier, and they're much more matchup dependent than the guys I've ranked above them. But lastly, at 25 in this tier is CJ Stroud, who does get drafted as quarterback 20 off the board. However, I don't trust that at all. It's all going to come down to the passing touchdown production. And last year, Stroud was a massive bust. He wasn't even top 30 at the position in points per game. He only averaged 12 fantasy points per game last year, and that was terrible. If you drafted Stroud, you probably cut him and never looked back by week 4. But 2 years ago, he did have a very strong stretch of games, but if you look at all 16 games when he was fully healthy, it wasn't much better. You kind of have to cherry pick with CJ Stroud, because if you look at the entire numbers, he has never averaged more than 14 points per game. 2 years ago, on average, it was just 13.4 points per game. But there were some terrible games where a lot of his receivers were banged up. When he has a full bevy of weapons, sometimes he does crack that 20-point threshold. So you're really just hoping for the best, hoping his receivers stay healthy. But in general, with a really bad offensive line and no rushing value, I don't trust Stroud in my lineup at all. So extremely matchup dependent, no rushing value, and just a very low floor. In general, Stroud, I think, is a league loser, not a league winner. Next up at quarterbacks 26, 27, and 28, this tier of 3 players has no rushing value at all and may retire by the end of the season, if not sometime during the season. I have Tua, Matthew Stafford, and Aaron Rodgers, and I don't want to be drafting them at all. Tua is actually okay when he's actually starting, but if he gets a concussion, misses another 10 games this season, I wouldn't be shocked at all. If this is his last year in the NFL, it would not be surprising. And whenever you have Tua, it also feels kind of gross to root for him, because you know at any point he could get hurt. And oftentimes he doesn't throw more than 1 passing touchdown with no rushing value. That is terrible in fantasy production. So I don't want to draft Tua. I'm going to pass this year. I have him ranked behind his ADP of quarterback 24. And while he does have some higher upside when things work out, in general, they don't. So no thank you with Tua. In my opinion, he's not a quarterback you should target. And then Stafford is pretty unreliable because he doesn't have any rushing stats either. When his 2 receivers were healthy last season, he was a top 20 quarterback, but on the year, he was barely top 30, and in general, the touchdowns just don't really hit that often. But with the addition of Devontae Adams, maybe it works out. However, his back injury is a major concern. If Stafford misses the first 6 weeks of the season, I would not be that surprised. He's 37 years old, and he's had some major injuries over the course of his career. Stafford is not the safe play like he was a few years ago. So Stafford, not a quarterback I'm targeting at all. My quarterback 27, that's his ADP as well. So only if you're stacking in best ball would I consider it. And then Aaron Rodgers probably going to have some diminished numbers in the Steelers offense. There's not that many targets you really trust in Pittsburgh, but I might be ranking him too low at quarterback 28. Last year, Rodgers was quarterback 23 in points per game scoring. However, the Jets had a much better receiving core than the Steelers do, and that's why I'm not dying to trust him very much. So the Steelers are going to win with defense. Rodgers doesn't have to do very much, and he offers nothing on the ground. The upside, I don't think, is very high for these 3 quarterbacks. But outside the top 28, these players are in a quarterback rotation, and all 6 of them will get some starts, but the backup is also going to get some starts as well. I have Anthony Richardson at 29, followed by Daniel Jones, then Russell Wilson and Jaxson Dart of the Giants, and then lastly Joe Flacco and Shedeur Sanders of the Browns at 33 and 34. And to guarantee these players play more than 10 games this season is a massive gamble. Obviously, Richardson has elite upside when he's healthy, but it doesn't always hit. Last year, he was only quarterback 26 in points per game scoring. However, in his final 5 games, he did average 18 fantasy points per game and was a top 10 quarterback. So maybe the upside on Richardson is worth betting on, but in general, I don't want to risk it if it's not best ball. When he doesn't play well, he doesn't give you more than 10 points. He is a weak loser more often than a weak winner. And Daniel Jones is probably a safer floor play, but not reliable to be on the field very often. He does have some rushing upside, but I don't think he has the same caliber ceiling as Richardson. So if I was just going to draft one, I would definitely prefer Anthony Richardson, but I think both of them are going to get some starts. I don't trust either of them to play a full season. And same goes in New York with the Giants. Russell Wilson is the week 1 starter, but Jaxson Dart looks really good in the preseason. And at some point, this team is not competitive enough where they're going to trust Russell Wilson all year long. At some point, they will see what they have in Jaxson Dart when the losses start to pile up. So I think there is some upside with all of these guys, but I just don't trust them to stay on the field. So you're not drafting them. You're not really dying to start them, but maybe at some point in time, they might crack your lineup as a streaming option. And then in Cleveland, I have Joe Flacco and Shedeur Sanders. We have seen some upside from Flacco in the past, but he's not going to play a full season, that's for sure. And then Shedeur is a good pocket passer, at least he looked that way in the preseason, but a rookie like him is probably going to have some growing pains. I'm not dying to draft a Browns quarterback at all. So those are the lower end fantasy streamers. There's no way you're drafting them if it's not a super flex format, and they're never going to crack your lineup unless you're desperate. But lastly, I think these New Orleans Saints quarterbacks are unstartable. No effing chance I'm ever putting Tyler Shough or Spencer Rattler in my lineup. At this point, I still don't know who's the starting quarterback in New Orleans. They'll both probably get some starts this season in New Orleans. So that's it for all of the starting options at quarterback, but I will mention just a few backups. I think Jimmy Garoppolo, Kirk Cousins, Marcus Mariota, Jalen Milroe, Joe Milton, and Jameis Winston are the most valuable backups this season. There are probably going to be some starts for these guys at some point in time, given the quarterback concerns that they have. I do think Cousins could still get traded, and the other guys maybe have some injury risk above them. So that's it for my quarterback rankings. This video went a bit longer than I would like, so here they are on the screen in the tiers that I mentioned. We have the MVP cheat codes in the top 4 with Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jayden Daniels, and Jalen Hurts. If you wanted to make a tier break behind Josh Allen, then I wouldn't fault you, but I genuinely think if everything stays healthy and ideal circumstances are there for Daniels and Hurts, they could also finish as the quarterback 1 themselves. So these top 4 are the best you can find. Then in the Steely Dan tier, I'm hoping that Joe Burrow and Baker Mayfield can do it again. And then the safe low-end quarterback 1s would be Bo Nix, Brock Purdy, Patrick Mahomes, and Justin Herbert in the top 10, a very reliable floor with top 10 upside any given week. Next up in the following tier, we have the rushing upside that you just can't pass on. Drake May, Caleb Williams, Justin Fields, and Kyler Murray are all going to average somewhere above 30 rushing yards per game this season. But then quarterbacks 15 through 18 in the high-end backup tier, we have Jordan Love, Dak Prescott, Jared Goff, and Trevor Lawrence. I think these are some of the safest floors you can find, and there is league-winning upside if everything works out well for them. We saw Goff finish top 7 last year. Any of these 4 players, I think, could do that this season. But then quarterbacks 19 through 21, the unproven young guys, probably just backups, but definitely have some league-winning upside if everything goes right. If they can prove themselves, we might be looking at them as top 12 options in fantasy this year. Following that, I think only in Superflex would you even consider drafting these players. They are very matchup dependent, but will crack your lineup as good streaming options at some point this year. I have Geno Smith, Sam Darnold, Cam Ward, and CJ Stroud at quarterbacks 22 through 25. But then quarterbacks 26 through 28, I'm not dying to have at all. The no legs might retire tier is not very valuable, in my opinion. Tua, Matthew Stafford, and Aaron Rodgers, I think are going to stay on the waiver wire most of the time this season. And then lastly, the quarterback rotations. They will get some starts, but not a full season. Anthony Richardson at 29 is by far the most valuable in this tier, but not reliable to stay on the field at all. And then Daniel Jones, Russell Wilson, Jaxson Dart, Joe Flacco, Shedeur Sanders will get some playing time. It's just not quite clear how many games they will start. And then lastly, the unstartable tier of Tyler Shough and Spencer Rattler. No effing chance I'm ever considering a Saints quarterback in my lineup. That's really scraping the bottom of the barrel. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button for more content like this. Next up, we'll be updating wide receivers and ranking tight ends. That's all going to come this week. By the end of Friday, you will have all of my positional rankings at every position. So that's it for me. My name's Adam Riancho. I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.